Here's falling out. I'm Hella, and I live here on Short Mountain. And yeah, I'm a musician and a performance artist and a gardener and a amateur herbalist slash botanist, self-teaching, self-taught, and yeah.
Where does your interest
In queer ecology
come from?
Well, I think there's a lot of different levels. I mean, there's the level of just being queer, caring about the environment, and then those things informing each other, which I think is a lot in that book, is like kind of showing how discourses of ecology can be reinforcing of homophobia if you're not particular. So there's that. But then I think there's also these like broader levels in a couple different ways. One for me is kind of more spiritual and like how I experience spirituality via nature and as that relates to queerness. And then there's this other level too of like my perspective on the just whole kind of economy and capitalism, and how that relates to nature and then how that relates to queerness. That's something that I think about a lot and I think is especially relevant with our lives here and how we're living, and also to our goal of eventually having specifically a queer land trust. And for me, a lot of that has to do with the way that the sort of heteronuclear family is kind of like a fundamental unit of capitalism and how we take care of our needs in this society, in this economy, and resources and things like that. So, you know, you have nuclear families with the idea being that each family is kind of taking care of its own self, like, and that sort of I have to take care of my family being this bottom line that kind of forces people into like using capitalism or engaging in capitalism to get their needs met and to get resources. And you know, it's like I don't need to go on and on about that because I feel like it's very well documented and researched in this way, like how the nuclear family kind of became a reinforcing unit for that type of economy. And so I see there being this great potential when you look at queer family and how because the sort of heteronuclear family like doesn't necessarily apply to a queer person, not only because they're not trying to, you know, partner and make children in that specific way, but also because of how the nuclear families also sometimes push out the queer people in their family. You see all these sort of alternative family structures that form in a queer community. And you see people, you know, sometimes even very explicitly like taking on language of like, this is my son, this is my daughter, that's my mom, like, you know, even using the same words for different family members, but applying them to like non-blood family to make these little queer families. It's like very obvious with drag queens, kind of having this like mom and daughter. I think it's fairly obvious in the whole lesbian scene too, with this kind of like sisterly vibes, and within like polyamory as well, like people having multiple partners and the kind of I call them geometries, but they're also like families too in this way that people are interconnected. And then of course when you get into actually like children, then you have different people parenting, different people adopting and everything like that. So I just think the way that queers do family is already such a potentially huge step outside of that nuclear model that then relates to how you get your needs met and resources and how you engage in the economy. And so I guess I'm interested in the idea of queer ecology because I'm interested in how sort of like queer families can have a different opportunity to get their needs met in a different way than just engaging in capitalism in that way, because you don't have that mindset of my duty is to take care of this family, therefore I'm going to automatically like enter the capitalist economy in order to do that. It's like because we're already challenging that whole idea of family the way that we take care of each other and the way that we get our needs met and get our resources can be different as well. And so I'm interested in, like what I feel like what we're doing here is like opting out of the capitalist economy as much as we can. Obviously, we're not completely free from it, but by, building a lot of our own things, growing a lot of our own food, making a lot of the things that we need, bartering with one another, all of these different ways, it's like the alternative family structure also can come with like an alternative economic structure in this way, or an alternative way of getting our needs met and getting the resources that we need. And that, of course, also relates to the ecology, because I just think that the relationship between a capitalist economy and nature is just going to be exploitative, because capitalism always has to grow. So it means that it always has to tap into resources that it can keep getting more and more of, whether that be, labor, or economic or ecological resources, natural resources. And so, I just think capitalism is inherently like never going to prioritize like honoring nature and caring for ecosystems. It's always just going to be extracting what it needs and not necessarily, even caring about making those resources be renewable and things like that. So I think like I see, at least in my own life and also in just this community, I see people who are kind of simultaneously trying to opt out of a capitalist economy and opt out of a nuclear family model at the same time. So they just really go hand in hand for me in that way. And I'm really interested in the idea of eventually having a queer land trust, because I also think that, having access to land is one of the most powerful ways that we have available to us right now to extract as much of ourselves as we can from the capitalist economy. Because when you have direct access to the land, you can access the natural resources yourself, and we can also manage them in a more sustainable way, in a way that's more loving and honoring of the ecosystems, like in and of themselves, not just taking. And so I'm interested in the idea of just finding ways to encourage queers to be able to have those types of relationship with the land. And so then on top of everything else, when you combined, the homophobia and the discrimination that also, causes queers to be economically disadvantaged, how to actually purchase land, because that's the system that we have right now, is that land has to be purchased, even though on a fundamental spiritual level that's like very bogus to me, the idea that it could be a resource to be purchased, but this is what we're dealing with right now. So how to actually get people to be able to buy land is like a really big question for me. And I think something that you do see in this neighborhood that I always have sort of mixed feelings about is that there are people who have made money by engaging in the capitalist system, particularly by like living parts of their lives in an urban environment and then coming here and buying land. And on one hand, it's a really good thing, because now in this neighborhood, we have thousands of acres that are all, interconnected, that are all owned by queers. So it's like, instead of just 10 acres here, 10 acres there, we can have like an entire, practically a whole watershed, or like an entire interconnected ecosystems that are all being, more mindfully stewarded than they might be if somebody was just coming to log the land or something. At the same time, it also does create a class dynamic in our own neighborhood, where the people who have been able to be successful in the capitalist system can then, come from the city with the money that they earned in that way and have their own piece of land that they have autonomy over. And then you see other people who, for various reasons, either don't want to or cannot be successful in the capitalist system, that have, to my mind, have a tremendous wealth of resources in terms of their skills, in terms of their actually having lived on the land and the skills that come with that. Not only the physical skills of like how do you do it, but also the mental and kind of emotional like attitude, to be able to live on the land. And so having all those resources, but not actually having the money resource to buy a piece of land and feel like this is my home and I'm autonomous here. So I'm interested in this idea of eventually having a land trust, because I would like to have land that's being kind of set aside and held specifically for queer community projects that people can access without their only way of accessing being like actually leaving the land, going to the city, engaging in the economy, and then coming back to the land later. Like, and this is a big personal in my life, like decisions that I've had to make around, you know, especially I'm about to turn 30. I've been living on the land, not here, but just other various land projects since I was like 22. So, you know, just feeling even as a young person, like the pressure on me that I'm supposed to be in a city kind of living up my youth in these ways. And that I can go to the city, make my money, and then eventually get a piece of land that I will eventually make my home. Like that paradigm never worked for me because I didn't want to wait. I didn't want to use my youth to get money to later live on the land. I just wanted to start living on the land as soon as possible. So I just want to, you know, do this land trust because I want to support as many kind of points as access as possible for queer people to have a relationship with the land without the only option being you actually have to be in an urban scene first and earn your money first, and then when you're 40 or 50 then you can come back and live on the land. I'm like, no, people are young, their bodies are strong, they're ready to build things and make trails, and you know, it's like people are ready in their youth. So I want to, you know, and then the flip side of that being also like, how do we care for the elders in our family too, and do that. So it's not just about the youth, but you know, the point being just that I want not only queers to be able to access the land, but queers who don't necessarily have monetary resources. And it's largely because they're already dedicating their lives to living on the land, which means they're not dedicating their lives to being in the city and earning money. And so that's another small aspect as well, kind of a significant aspect actually that I think a lot about as well, is sort of the tendency for queer people to like conglomerate into urban areas, and sort of, you know, I feel like it's a very common story of like being the only queer kid in your small town or rural area, and then you're kind of just waiting until you're old enough to move to the city where you can actually be in community. And I think, you know, that's some people's story, and that's great, and I'm glad that that works for people. But then there are also people for whom, like, whether to live in a rural environment or a woodland environment like we are here, or an urban environment, is like a very pressing decision that feels like maybe even higher stakes than having queer community. And that's kind of been my thing too, is like, I just really have no desire to live in the city. I love living in the woods. I love being close to nature all the time. And that's why this place is such a dream, because it's a place where I can live close to nature and have queer community at the same time. And I just really want to foster those options for people as well, so that moving to the city is not the only way that people can have queer community. Because for some people, like, you know, how I really feel about my own life is like, if I had to choose for some reason between living in a city and having queer community and living in the country or in the woods and not having queer community, it would be a very difficult decision for me. But I might still choose to live in the woods. Mm-hmm. And that would be such a sad sacrifice if that meant that I didn't get to have queer community. But that's why I feel so committed to this place, because I don't have to make that choice. I can have both of those things here. And so I just want to see that become nationwide. You know, I think it's like, when people hear about this place, it's really like alarming in this way. It's like, oh my gosh, all of these queers like living in the middle of the mountains, in the middle of nowhere in Tennessee. Like, wow, it's so shocking to people, you know? And I would like that to be like in every state. I would like there to be some little wooded or natural or rural area where there's like a little pocket of queers, you know? That would be the dream, you know? There's more of that. So I want to promote that, and I want to encourage people to support each other in that as well, so that people don't have to feel like they have to make that choice between nature and queer community, that they can have both. So I think that's another big like sticking point on like queer ecology for me, is finding those other people for whom being close to nature is as high of a priority as being in queer community, and being able to merge those two like we do here is such an important thing, I think. Mm-hmm. that's some of my thoughts.
Wow, thanks. Okay, switched off.
Which way to grow? They just know, they just know. Birds don't ever question why. They just fly, they just fly. Streams don't seem to wonder where they go. They just flow, they just flow. My mind seems designed to try to find the things my eyesight won't show. Follow my belly, follow my tongue, down, down, down. Hope somebody tells me where we can go together. The young, follow my mouth, I follow my hand, down, down, down. Wildfire burning to the sound, the hungry and hollow returning to the land. Down, down, down we go. Splinters and stings. I'm nothing more than a tree who's mistaken a warm day in winter for spring. I put on green new leaves insistently. I cling to the last warm breeze before I freeze. Down, down, down we go. Down, down, down we go. I follow my nose, I follow my feet. Down, down, down. Hope somebody knows where we can go together. Down, down. The sweet. I follow my mouth, I follow my hand. Down, down, down. Wildfire burning to the south, the hungry and hollow returning to the land. Down, down, down we go. Down, down to the ground. to the ground. Down, down, down we go. Down, down to the ground. Down, down, down.
Well, just to give a little bit of like history for the neighborhood. So the sanctuary was originally purchased by like hippies during the sort of back to the land movement in the 70s. And then kind of those people who purchased that land eventually all kind of wandered away. And there was just one kind of person from the original group left. And he sort of transitioned it into being this gay and lesbian sanctuary, and then the Radical Fairies started coming and hosting their gatherings there, so it kind of took on some of the Radical Fairy culture as well. And anyway, so then there was this sanctuary, and then the exact years I'm not so clear on, but eventually Neil Applebaum actually came along and purchased a bunch of land all around the sanctuary and put it into a conservation easement, and then divided those parcels, and that this where we are right now at the meadow is one of those parcels. And so you know, it was in a way like kind of the foresight of this one person to kind of realize like this could become a whole neighborhood. And so from there, you know, different people started buying those lands, and it kind of became this whole neighborhood. And but like I said, so one of the dynamics within that is that you have certain lands like the sanctuary, like Haide, and like here, that are very much like trying to be collective, trying to make decisions by consensus. And then you have other lands that are kind of more like people's personal estates in this sense or whatever. And a lot of those people also don't necessarily have children. And so kind of one of the ideas behind the land trust, besides just, you know, fundraising to purchase land, is also that people who bought land because they wanted to be here in queer community can then have sort of children to pass it on to. And so that's kind of one of my biggest hopes is that, I mean, of course, I think we're going to have to do fundraising and things like that too, but I would love the idea that we're actually just sort of a place that can receive land that people are, when they pass away or move away, are passing on. And then we can then pass that land on to queer collectives, of people who want to live collectively. With some flexibility, you know, we kind of just want to have these parcels available, and then people come to us and make a proposal like, we want to do this type of project, and we're like, great, we've got this 30 acres here that will be perfect for you, you know, and everything like that. So, but it's just in the very, very beginning stages. So kind of how I see it right now is more, you know, is we're just doing what we can with the collective lands that are in place right now. And that's kind of been like me personally looking around at my options around the neighborhood. It's like, I just want to keep living on the lands that are being collective. And yeah, so I don't know, it's just in formation stage, but I think just the fact that this neighborhood has been around for so many decades is a testament to that something here is working, you know. And I think that the environment itself, the woods and everything, I think is like really, really shielding for people. I think, I mean, definitely for myself, and I think other people too, it's like people just really talk about how magical this place is. And it's kind of, for me, a combination of both, that we are honoring the nature and allowing it to be this pristine environment, and allowing people, like, if you need shielding, like, the trees are here for you, the land is here for you. and then also like having people have certain intentions here, and those intentions being reinforced year after year with like our rituals and our magic. And, you know, even just dancing around the maypole every year, it's like we're just weaving the community together year after year. And so people experience a magic to this place that I think is really real. And it comes from people holding an intention here, and then like sort of the energy, and this is where it gets kind of more spiritual, but the energy of that actually going into the land. And it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, because we recently had a beloved community member who passed away just a couple of weeks ago. This person took the ultimate sanctuary here. This person came back to the land because they wanted to die in the embrace of the land. And I feel like when they died, like their spirit like just kind of infused directly into the land in this way. So it's like on this spiritual level, I feel like the kind of spiritual blessings of the land are in the rocks, are in the water, are in the trees. And people who like dedicate their lives here, and even who come to die here, are like actually blessing the physical land in a way that then bounces off and echoes back to us. And so I've just been thinking about that a lot lately too, like the fact that we do all this magic around fires and around water and the elements and with the trees and everything. It's like all of the magic that we generate actually like infuses into the land itself, so that it is available for future generations, I guess, in this way. So it's kind of the spiritual thing for me too, that I feel like when people just always say, oh, it's such a magical experience being here, it's like, yeah, the trees are soaked in our intentions, you know, the rocks are holding the spirits of our ancestors, you know, and everything. So it's great. I love it.
Yeah,
It's powerful in that way.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think queerness relates to ecology on that spiritual level as well, because I think it's like I see eroticism as this huge umbrella, and like sex is just one element under eroticism, but I see eroticism as kind of just being any kind of experience through the senses that like makes you feel alive, and that like, you know, fills you with that feeling of like a life force. Just ecstatic experiences of being alive through sensation and scent and sight and beauty and things like that. And I think that is just this huge thing that all humans have access to. And then like patriarchy and the whole hetero norm like tries to narrow that down to this very limited kind of script that you're supposed to follow to have like erotic fulfillment in your life. You're supposed to find this opposite sex partner, you're supposed to set up this family, and you're supposed to fill your specific gender role, and you're supposed to follow the whole pre-written script of how that interaction happens. And it's so, I just think it's so narrowing. It takes this huge world of possibilities of what I think of just things that make you feel alive, and narrows it down to this one type of sex and love that you're supposed to be having. And so I feel like for queers, you're already expanding outside of that one little narrow hetero option. And so it's not always going to be the case that everyone will be like this, but I think once you're already breaking out of that narrow limitation, you have the freedom to now expand your definition of the erotic even further in this way. And so I see an interconnection there where it's like just looking at and smelling like the blossoms on a cherry tree in the springtime is like this physical experience of just being filled with life. And it's you know, it's erotic, and it's totally erotic. And so I think queers, you know, not in an essentialist way, like we were talking earlier, not because there's something inherently about queers that but just that once you're able to expand out of my experience of like erotic fulfillment in this life doesn't have to be just this one straight and narrow way of going about it. I can also have, you know, same-sex love or genderqueer love or whatever, and then that can expand even further to like smelling this flower is like practically an orgasm, you know, just in the way that it just like fills you with life or whatever. And or just last solstice when we all went to the waterfall and we found this green clay, and we were just covering our bodies with the clay and then washing it off, and it was like making our skin so smooth. And I just remember feeling like, oh my gosh, this experience is just so transformative because it's just putting me so deeply in my body, and then I'm putting this green clay on and I don't even really look like a human anymore. I look like a plant or a lizard or something, and then I'm washing it off and it's like renewing my skin, and it just made me feel like, oh my gosh, so much of my experience here that makes me want to live is about these interactions with nature that put me in my body and make me have an erotic experience with my body. And I think that's, you know, especially important too, like, I really see it almost as like a part of queer liberation, because I think like anybody who is not willing to conform and is not willing to assimilate, whether it's because you're queer, you know, person of color, just radical in any kind of way, any of those things, like, I sort of feel like it's like a death system. It's like the system doesn't actually want you to thrive and live. It wants you to fit into its box. And if you're trying to live outside of its box, it's going to be trying to like put its hands around your throat and strangle you out all the time. And so I think people who experience oppression, we also have to take special care of our mental health in this way. And we have to constantly be fighting against this system that's like kind of telling us like conform or die. And if you can't conform, then it makes you want to die. And that's why you see like queers have higher rates of suicide and things like that. And so I really think that like nature and access to nature is particularly important for people who experience oppression, because it is something that can put you in your body and make you feel your life force in a way that makes you want to stay alive. And so if nothing else, it's like, I want queers to access nature because it will just make us want to stay alive. And even if you have to be there in the system, like constantly fighting the system, you're like, I'm gonna fight because I want to live, instead of just, you know, the world is defeating me and I just want to die, you know. And I completely respect and honor people's right to suicide and everything like that too. But I just think, yeah, like nature is crucial for everyone. And I think anybody, whether they're queer or not, can get inspiration to not want to conform to the system by these erotic experiences with nature. But like queers in particular, I just want to foster opportunities for that, because I just want queers to want to stay alive. And I think nature makes me feel alive and makes me want to stay alive. So that helps me feel more hopeful in the face of oppression and the system kind of trying to close down on us, because I'm just like, I'm gonna fight to stay alive, you know, and hold sanctuary here so that other people can come and get that inspiration. So it's just really directly correlated for me in that way too. Like my experience of nature and my experience of being queer is like, I want to stay alive because I love nature, and like the world can't get me down, you know. In the same way that I'm saying like eroticism is this huge thing that heterosexuality funnels down, it's like that's kind of how I feel about what heterosexuality does to nature. It's like what is natural in terms of how human bodies can interact with each other to bring each other pleasure is this huge, you know, vast ocean of possibilities. And then heterosexuality like narrows it down to this like really specific thing. So like in my mind, when I think of heterosexuality as being unnatural, because it's taking all the possibilities of nature and saying, actually, you can only do this one thing. And so to me, I'm like, that seems unnatural. It seems like if people were just allowed to follow their true natures, all kinds of possibilities would be an option. So the notion of queerness being unnatural is like a complete mirror image reverse to me of how I actually think about it. It's like nature is actually the rug that's under everything else, or it's what creates everything. And so to say something like homosexuality is unnatural, it's like if it wasn't natural, then it wouldn't occur. You know, something unnatural would be me throwing a ball in the air, and instead of coming down, it keeps floating up. Like that's literally defying the laws of nature. That would be unnatural. But anything that sort of happens is natural, including all of these bizarre activities that humans do that actually place us further from the sort of elements of nature of plants and water and things like that. So it's like it's actually even within our nature as humans, apparently, to put up a big concrete building in which we can go inside and hide from what's out there, which we then start to categorize as this separate category of nature. So yeah, in a way, I feel like, you know, pre like really intensive technology and civilization, like people probably didn't even, I mean, who knows, but they probably didn't even talk about it like that, or have a word for it like that, because there was no need to make a distinction. Yeah, because obviously nature is operational even in an urban environment, so it's a false dichotomy in my own brain too. But yeah, it's like I just need to see more green is what I should really say. I just need to look out and have like 80% of what I'm seeing is green and not made by humans, you know, or something like that.
Do you feel that there is a different way the land looks like if it's a queer land?
The first thing that I thought of when you asked me that was just the kind of ritual spaces that we've created and like all the altars and things like that. I think about, I don't know if you've walked down to our little spring bath, but like, you know, spring-fed bath surrounded by all these crystals and mirrors and little magical objects. And I always just called it the spring bath, but the other day somebody was visiting was like, let's go to the water shrine, and they called it the water shrine. And so I think there is a certain kind of creativity and spirituality in how we kind of design some of the spaces in this way. And when they said water shrine, I was like, you know, I never really thought about it like that. But when I think about how I use that space, you know, some of it's practical. I'm just going to take a bath, but it's also very spiritual, where it's like, okay, we just had a really emotional conversation. I'm going to go and dunk in the water and just sort of cleanse that energy off of myself. Or like with that spring in particular, because it's right on the trail, I've kind of gotten in this habit where I just stop and take a drink of water there every single time I pass it, whether I'm actually feeling thirsty or not, because it's something that I feel like just keeps me connected to the land in this way. And it's just like this very brief moment where no matter what's going on in my life, I can be like, I have this clean, delicious tasting water that's just coming out of this rock that's available to me. And so I just think about those daily rituals. I mean, not just daily, my own daily rituals, and then larger rituals around like specific holidays and things like that, and the different like, you know, fire pits that we create for that with the altars and everything. So I think that's where I can see, like, just that was the first thing that came into my head when you said, how does it look different? Is like, yes, because we're actually trying to create these little places in that are, you know, with the natural elements around it, like this spot is special for this particular reason, and it becomes a way to interface with the natural elements that also is symbolic of other things, and the way that the space is arranged kind of like encourages that or whatever. Whether it's, oh, sorry, okay.
Yeah, what?
Oh, just like whether it's like we want to put a fire here, you know, a fire pit here, and like now these trees right here come to absorb whatever intentions we were gathering around this fire for or whatever. And so I think the ritual spaces are a particular place where you can see like the kind of queer creative spirit designing the space so that you can kind of live in the metaphor of like whatever the nature is symbolically doing for you, for your life, for your energy body and everything like that. So that's kind of the first thing that comes to my mind. And then of course there's just the fact that we build our structures and things out of the trees that are here, out of like scavenged materials and everything like that. And so I think, you know, in the same way that queers aren't necessarily trying to live up to the normative standards of relationship, sexuality, and everything, it's like kind of the same applies when it comes to our buildings. And you see some variation across the neighborhood, of course, around that, but it's like, and in Tennessee in particular, because our different like housing laws are so lax and sort of unenforceable up here in the mountains, it's like we can build these little houses that are not up to code, the lines aren't straight, everything's kind of cobbled together, but you know, I mean, houses built out of straw and mud and everything like that, and doesn't have to fit into that, again, that standard of you know, especially I think when children get involved, there tends to be that sort of like, oh, it's got to be safe for the kids, and you don't want child services coming and saying that your home is, you know, unsafe for children or whatever, things like that. It's like, well, we don't have to worry about that as much here, so our houses can kind of be built in this more creative way and things like that too. I never thought about it till you put it like that, but I'm sure that our just sort of queer perspective like actually influences how we build our structures and things like that. So. Well, at the water shrine, I mean, I just feel like water is always in motion, and it's something that can like wash things away. And so I feel like water is, it can be cleansing. Like I think it can cleanse energy. I think it's something that reminds us. I think that being around water like helps us accept the fluidity of life and how things are always changing. Like you go to drink the water, you can never drink the same drop of water twice. It's just always flowing. And then of course, you know, some of the metaphors are just so literal, like just tears, you know, and how tears actually like move chemicals out of our bodies. I read that they did this study where they measure the chemicals in tears of sorrow and tears of joy, and the chemicals are different in those types of tears. So I think like crying, it literally is so cathartic to cry because it's actually moving these chemicals out of our bodies that are making us feel things. And so being around water flowing, I think also helps people's emotions to flow more easily and people's tears to flow more easily. But I mean, it's like you could point to any natural element and I have these metaphors for all of them. You know, I think that nature is just metaphors upon metaphors upon metaphors. So that's just like one example, like just one element, water. That's all these things that water does, you know. I mean, I guess in a way, I think of plants as being queer in some sense, because the ways that the sort of sexes of plants are arranged is kind of different for different plants. So it's like you have these plants, like in botany, actually, they use the term bisexual for plants that have both like quote male and female parts, which actually I have one herb teacher who calls it. What does he call it? He calls it like staminate and ovate or something. Like he's completely taken gender out of how he describes the different plant parts or whatever. But, you know, they call it male and female parts of the plants. But in botany, they say a plant can either be called perfect or bisexual, and that means it has its male and female parts on one plant, so it can self-fertilize itself. And so a lot of botanists will make this joke: bisexual plants are perfect plants, you know. And so I think about that, like some of the, you know, just the kind of gender fuck of being queer. To me, I relate it to the plants sometimes, because it's like some plants, it's like that tree is female, that tree is male, and then other trees, it's like that tree is like a perfect bisexual tree or whatever. And so I think that kind of comes into it. I mean, I think about that a lot in general, like how, you know, quote, sex in nature, you know, relates or doesn't relate to the way that humans categorize sex amongst ourselves. And I think it's like, if you look at the natural world, the diversity of arrangements like that is actually true of human beings as well. But because of like our society wanting to just say it's this one thing or another, and even our tendency to, like, for example, name trees as male and female, kind of like apply our actually very narrow, you know, socially constructed ideas of sex, of like male and female, and using those words on a plant, which like none of the archetypes or stereotypes of masculinity and femininity really mean anything to a plant. It's just, you know, like I said, staminate and ovate. It just either has stamens or it has ovaries. But then even ovaries is like, that's a very human word as well. So, you know, I just think that instead of applying our super particular definitions for sex onto plants, it's like we could actually do the opposite and learn from observing all the diversity of how plants do it. And then you get into like mushrooms and reptiles, and it's like even a whole other insane huge world of how like you could gender or sex different things. So I feel like plants are kind of queer in that way, you know. And I was just up at the other fairyland up in Vermont, actually, and they had, we were actually just about to do a ritual, and I looked down and I picked up this little cutest little orange like salamander thing, and I was like, oh, this is so cute, what is it? And somebody who lives there was like, oh, that's the Eft, like this is very auspicious, this is the mascot of the land. And they were all excited because it was like this good omen for them that I had found this Eft right before the ritual. And they were describing this F to me, and it's this like salamander or something type of creature that is little and orange, and it lives on the land as an adolescent, and then when it hits adulthood, it completely transforms into this like black spiky dragon, and then it goes and lives in the water. And that's like their mascot for the land, right? And I just thought, that's such a great mascot, because it's like this animal that is capable of like a total transformation, which I think you see in the lifetime of a queer person, you know, coming to know themselves. I think you can see it in even, you know, just like I've been doing drag and hang out with lots of drag queens and drag kings. So that whole like, I'm going to transform through like costumes into this completely other thing, you know. So I'm like, this is the perfect little animal mascot for this land, and they all thought it was very like auspicious that I had found it. So, you know, certain animals too, of course, I think of as being like being queer. And it's like we were at the state fair, and there's all these like specialty hens with their big feathers, and we're like, oh, that hen is like a total drag queen, like, you know. So it's like sometimes these animals are just really flashy, and you're like, oh yeah, that chicken is just like a drag queen with her big feather boa on and everything like that. So I think, you know, that's a little bit like anthropomorphizing, but it's still like how we get used to as queers like certain aesthetics from our culture, and then that's what we end up applying to what we see in nature, like, oh, that chicken's a drag queen, you know. So again, just to go back to the concept of sex too, like I think it's really, again, bizarre and unnatural that in our society, the concept of sex is used to like enforce that people are supposed to be a certain way because that's their nature. Because when I actually think about evolution, and I think about, you know, self-reproducing asexual organisms like bacteria, eventually giving way and evolving into things that actually have sex. Like what I always think about that is like, so kind of the idea there behind having male and femaleness or something, or having different sexes, is that you're now able to combine like two different sets of DNA to make an offspring instead of just cloning. And so for me, it's like, and again, this is kind of anthropomorphizing like nature as this spirit, but like if nature had any kind of goal or whatever with creating sex, or not even goal, just the result of the creation of sex was more diversity. And now we're into diversity being a troubling word, but just the fact that instead of just replicating, cloning the same set of DNA, you can now combine two sets of DNA and come up with something completely different. And so on this fundamental like spiritual level of like, what does sex mean in terms of nature creating sex as an option for evolution, it's like more possibilities is what I think of it. So then I find it really bizarre and like backwards that sex in our society is used to actually limit people's options and tell them they can only be a certain way, when I feel like the fundamental kind of like spiritual force of the even option of sex in nature is to be able to make a third combination that didn't exist before, to be able to create infinite new possibilities. So I just think about that a lot too as like queer ecology is like, yeah, the whole, you know, it's like nature seemed to create a lot of diversity when it created sex, and it opened up all these possibilities that weren't possible before. And now somehow this one species is now using sex to actually tell each other, oh, your options are limited, you're only supposed to be this certain type of way because this is your sex. You know, I'm just like, that seems like the opposite of what nature was trying to get at. I don't know. So I think about that a lot as well. Actually, most of my songs have nature imagery in them. It's like most of my metaphors.
Vines don't ask which way to grow. They just know, they just know. I've grown blisters and stings. I'm nothing more than a tree who's mistaken a warm day in winter for spring. I put on green new leaves insistently. I cling to the last warm breeze before I freeze. Down, down, down we go. Follow my nose, I follow my feet. Down, 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 down to the ground. Down, 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 down we go. Down, down, down the ground. Down, down, down we go, we go. Down, down, down the ground. Down, 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 down we go.
Anyway, this is the Bridget altar. Oh, let's go. I left a pen. And normally, when there's been rain, this is where the cisterns overflow down into this little kind of pond area here. So normally, this environment is also influenced by the sound of the water gushing. And that makes it really nice. And Bridget is like an old Irish goddess that got reappropriated as a Christian saint, so they still celebrate like Saint Bridget's Day in a lot of Catholic countries, like in Ireland. But she is she's the goddess of like metal smithing and also wordsmithing, and there's like a lot of legends in Ireland about these healing Bridget wells, so like wells and pools with like healing water, which I always thought is really nice that we have this when it has been raining, this nice water feature back here, because Bridget's like wells is a thing in Ireland. And you know, because I write music, like to come here when I'm trying to write music, because I feel like she facilitates words to come through for people, because she's like a wordsmith. And you know, like the legend is like she sort of taught people how to do metallurgy and how to write poetry and things like that. And I don't really know exactly the history of how this was, but there was a time when this was considered like kind of a little women's safe zone. So the idea was that if like two or more women were here, that it was like women's only moment. And that's not like super official, or like it doesn't seem to be super high in the consciousness of people here in the present, but I think that spell being cast in the past like still seems to kind of have some sort of impact, because I've noticed that sometimes when I'm here or I'm here with women, like people will start to come this way and then they'll divert off, or you know, people kind of, it's just like tucked away in this little way, you know, because it's this bamboo kind of hides it, so it just feels like, even though it's right here, right next to the main kitchen, it still feels like this little secret hideaway to me a lot of times. And it's like often where I come to, you know, when someone's like, oh, I need to talk about something hard, or just to kind of not have to go far, but to feel like you're more hidden and more more secretive and more private. And I've been doing a ritual here every Beltane Eve, Walpurgis Eve, for the past 5 or 6 years, where we build a fire here, and then we take some of the fire and merge it with the main fire in the knoll, and then bring some of that fire back. And it's in honor of the Brigid temple in Kildare, Ireland, which was a Brigid temple that kind of like went undercover as a convent in order to keep that tradition alive under oppression. And they kept that ritual fire burning for Brigid for like 1,000 years or something like that before the Pope finally declared that it was heresy and that it was unchristian, and they extinguished that fire. But there's kind of this tradition of like Brigid fires and of that flame from Kildare being kind of this symbol of like the fire enduring under oppression, kind of. So I feel like just really connected to this fire pit and to that story, because I think it's, you know, especially as queers and queer witches, it's just very much like part of the history. I mean, I just see the history of witchcraft and the history of queerness like really intertwined, and so it's like just really symbolic of our ability to endure and like keep burning bright even in like dark times or even in times of oppression and stuff. So I like to light this fire on Walpurgis Eve as a tribute to that and to kind of keep that spirit alive. Yeah, that's kind of what the space means to me. This is probably a little bit different for everybody, but full of spirits, so.
Do you think actually this is special for queer community that there are so many?
I mean, I think it means a lot for this space because so many people, like when this was really taking off as a community was also during the worst days of the HIV plague. And so I feel like the concept of this space as a sanctuary was really, really probably, I mean, I wasn't there, so I don't know, but I would imagine it was like very potent at that time, that this was a sanctuary for people. And I always just tend to assume that a lot of these people are people who got taken out by the HIV plague. And so I think it has that significance as far as like our queer history for sure. And just the way that we make family as queers, you know? So that like, you know, whether or not we do or don't relate to our blood ancestry, it's like there's still this sense of ancestry, like that other queers are my ancestors, even if they're not my blood ancestors in that way. So I feel like the people who lived here before, especially, who are memorialized here, like really kind of look out for the land. And I think that they keep tabs on people. Like I feel like there's one particular person that died in the 90s who lived here and whose spirit has communicated to me, and Saza says that she communicates with him as well, but I think she actually knew him when he was alive, which I never did. But he started communicating to me a couple years ago, and then we kind of didn't communicate for a while, but then he started communicating with me again recently. And I don't know, I feel like he's like my uncle on the other side of the veil or something. Like he kind of has his eye on me and kind of knows that I'm trying to do priestessing work and stuff. So I think he just kind of shows up or at least he showed up for me the night that Jackie died, and just to kind of encourage me and to kind of like, you know, I think it's like they approve, you know, they like that we've kept it going, and that the intentions that they set when they were here are still like alive today. So I think they like to kind of pop in and be like, you're doing great, you know, and everything like that. So, and that I also had that kind of feedback when there was some folks that came here a couple years ago for Beltane that were actually in the very first group of gay and lesbian people that lived here. And some of them hadn't been back in like 20, 30 years. And they came back, and it was just like really cool talking to them. We had this whole intergenerational circle where people who had been here all the way for 30 years and up until the newest people all kind of shared their story of how they got here and what this place means to them and stuff. And it was just really cool to get that whole story from all the way back, and then to have those people who were part of the very beginning but then haven't really been here for most of it come back, and we're like, well, what do you think, and they're just like, we are so thrilled that this everything that we envisioned has happened and more. So it was just really cool to hear that. I feel like I get that message from the spirits of the dead as well, that they're like, good job, y'all, you're keeping it going. So. And I also spent this one Beltane, or Beltane Eve, which is its own kind of night of ritual. I spent the whole night out here because I was really just kind of wanting to, really trying to just actually process some stuff from my own like blood ancestry and stuff and do ritual around it. And so I came out here thinking like around the more fall holidays that are just more explicitly about the dead, that like lots of people would be out here. But in the spring I thought, oh, I'll just go out there and like no one else will come out there. I'll just be alone and no one will bother me. And then it turned out that people were coming here all night long to do rituals. And I got to the point where I just went and hid back in the woods over there because I didn't want people to see me in my ritual, and I didn't want them to feel self-conscious to do their ritual. But it was just like 3 or 4 groups of people or individuals in a row would just come and like do their ritual and then leave and like come and speak to ancestors. And I was like, oh my gosh, this place is really busy tonight. Like, as it turns out, like people. So I thought it was cool though. I was like, oh, people are actually really inspired by this space in ways I didn't even realize. Yeah, well, because I think even when people were just first starting to come here back in the 80s and 90s, they had already lost so many people because of HIV that I think a lot of the people whose names are here are not necessarily people who lived here, but people that the people who lived here were wanting to remember. And I remember when I first started coming here, I was like 23, and I met Gonaway, and he was like, how old are you? And I said 23, and he was like, oh, 23. I remember 23. That was the year 15 of my friends died. And I was just like, whoa, like just really realizing the incredible impact that had on people's lives. And
Yeah.
I mean, I just can't even, I've just had so far in my life only a very small handful of people that I've known who have passed away. So I just can't even imagine like 15 friends in 1 year, the intensity of the change that you would have to go through and the grief and everything. So yeah, I think a lot of this, yeah, it makes sense to me that they're just already like having so many dead to memorialize by the time people started living here in the 80s and whatnot. Yeah, I don't know. But just thinking about, gosh, what people went through, with HIV, like I'm sure I do feel that it still reverberates through this community. That's a good point that you make, in the sort of ethic of care that people have. And, also just this slight feeling of like a bit of a generation gap where it's like there's a certain age group where there's less people in that age group and everything. And I think that affects too, like how things are changing as the younger generation is coming into the scene, like because even just the sheer numbers and the amount of energy that people has is different. And like our whole experience growing up queer, after the worst of the HIV plague was over, it makes it really different for us. And so I'm just always thinking about things like that, because it's like, how do we continue to progress into the future and allow things to change as it needs to just keep moving into the future, but then how do we continue to honor like what people went through in order to get us to this place is just something I think about a lot. And HIV being a huge part of that history, and just every death in general, and it's just been on my mind a lot lately, because Jackie died just here on the land in the bottoms. And as far as I know, that's the first person I've ever heard of that, like, there have been people who've lived in the neighborhood who've died, but maybe like at their house at a neighboring property or something. But this is the first person that I know of that died here. It just feels significant to me in some way. Like, it really I feel like I really have been learning from that experience about how the spirits get infused into like the rocks and into the trees, and I just actually feel really grateful that that person came here to die so that their spirit would be here for us. And they were buried over on Greenwell Lane, right by their place. Yeah, which I think is really amazing. It's like so rare that people get to be buried in the place that they lived, that they loved, and I just think that's really cool.
Yeah.
Tennessee is pretty lax about the burial laws, which is cool. Tennessee kind of lets you do what you want with the bodies of your loved ones, which is neat. Because like nobody was really trying to keep it together. Like no one was trying to keep a straight face. Like people were just wailing and just like openly sobbing, and you could just hear everybody kind of like, as each person would come up and say what they wanted to say about Jackie, like you kind of hear this collective like these like big group sighs. And I just remember people saying like, yeah, you know, usually when I go to a funeral, like people are just trying to keep it together and just try not to cry. And
I don't mind walking through spider webs. 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 It reminds me. It reminds me. Under that web there's another web. Fear not death. We've already died 1,000 times. There's another web. 1,000 times. Fear no burial. We will rise. Swirling into skeleton.